Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, 60 glorious minutes of multifaceted discussion where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and we feature the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anyagolu. Coming up in the next hour, according to the United Nations, the European Union and ECOWAS, West Africa is fast becoming the transit point for drug smuggling from South America to Africa and onto Europe. Narcotics from Latin and Central America to West Africa to Europe. So how big is this trade and how much is it undermining the region by inciting corruption and provoking violence? We'll speak to a panel that includes the NDLEA, the Nigerian federal agency charged with eliminating the trafficking of hard drugs, as well as a respected defense and security analyst, and the president of the Marine Club of Nigeria, who keeps a close eye on Nigeria's territorial waters. In a moment. Now, you may not know this, but drug trafficking and consumption have in the last few years become major issues in West Africa. Efforts around the West to stem the flow of cocaine from the producing countries of Latin America to consumers in the US and Europe have led criminals to target West Africa as a new route. Dramatic events like the crash landing of a Boeing 727 full of cocaine in Mali a few years ago have alerted the authorities to the problem. And a report commissioned by the United Nations estimates that the annual trade in cocaine alone through West Africa is now worth around $2 billion, almost as much as the total foreign direct investment in the region. Although drug trafficking and consumption are not new to the region, cannabis smoking, for example, has traditionally been more widespread in West Africa than in most parts of the world. The advent of harder drugs like cocaine and amphetamines is. So how are the governments and law enforcement in the region coping? Well, in a moment, we'll speak to our panel that includes the Nigerian federal agency charged with eliminating the trafficking of hard drugs, a respected defense and security analyst, and the president of the Marine Club of Nigeria, who keeps a weather eye on Nigeria's territorial waters through which drugs often pass. But first, here's a spokesman from the NDLEA talking about the new tactics being employed by drugs traffickers.
In recent time, they try to change some tactics, their tactics. As we are talking now, only last week, we made an arrest of a 72-year-old man who knows nothing. He practically could not even speak English, but he was convinced by somebody that he should go to Saudi Arabia to perform the Lesser Hajj. And then they got a passport for him, got a ticket for him, and brought him to Kano, lodged him in a hotel, arranged his luggage, and in the process they planted 600 grams of tramadol and then 250 grams of diazepam in his luggage, and then brought him to the airport gate and asked him to enter taxi and go on board. So in the process of our officers doing the screening, we discovered that this old man had this consignment of drugs. And when we asked him, he said somebody facilitated his travel to Saudi Arabia. Luckily for us, we put our men on ground and we were able to arrest the person that sent him. So now, what they are now trying to do is to use innocent Nigerians, old people or sickly people, to put drug into their luggage so that they can just go, because believing that the security operative will not really focus in our profiling, will not be able to focus on early people. Maybe they would think that they will not carry drugs or things like that.
Well, for more, I'm joined now in the studio by Dr. Ngozi Madubike, who is the Commander of Narcotics and Principal Staff Officer, Drug Demand Reduction at the NDLEA, the Nigerian federal agency charged with eliminating the trafficking of hard drugs. Also by the respected defense and security analyst, Kabiru Adamu, and the president of the Marine Club of Nigeria, Dr. Chinedu Obuagu, who keeps a close eye on Nigeria's territorial waters through which drugs are often smuggled. Thank you very much indeed to all of you for coming in. And thank you for coming in. I'll start with you, Dr. Madubike. Is this a growing problem? The UN says it is, the European Union says it is, and ECOWAS says it is.
Yes, I think I agree with them. It is a growing problem in the sense that there are emerging, drugs that never used to be there. For example, the methamphetamine, which is a new psychoactive substance, and then the growing interest in cannabis, which is being exported to, cannabis is cultivated here in Nigeria, but now being exported in very large quantities to other countries.
Is that because of the decriminalization and, in fact, the legalization of cannabis in many places?
I think that is part of the reason.
Right.
I think so. And the fact that other countries are beginning to say that there is need to legalize cannabis, and then the increasing use of cannabis too contributed to that. And then for Nigeria, that used to be a transit country, now is also a consuming country for such drugs like cocaine, heroin, and amphetamine type stimulants. And again, the increasing use of the pharmaceutical prescription opiates, which are also imported into Nigeria but are being consumed here and also transported to other countries of the world. So I will agree with them that is an increase, how did you describe it again?
It's a growing problem.
It's a growing problem.
Right. And Kabir Adamu, you are, of course, a defense analyst. You keep an eye not just on things like this, but as it affects security within Nigeria. A lot of this has often been said to have something to do with the problem of gangs across Nigeria, kidnapping gangs, and insurgency and all that sort of thing. How much is that a factor in this?
A huge factor. Several reports by UN agencies. The most recent one was by the Munich Security Institute, and it was actually launched here in this hotel. It showed clearly the correlation between crime, organized crime, and drug peddling, as it were. Most of the criminal groups, as well as terrorist groups, it's been proven have in one way or the other benefited from the structural deficiencies within our developing countries, the porous borders, corruption, as it were, and then of course even age-old traditional routes for sometimes trading that we don't pay attention to. So they use the proceeds from that, firstly, to consolidate their activities, be it whatever, it could be the terrorism that we're talking about, or other criminal activities on the one hand. On the other hand, they also ensure that the state, as it were, remains permissive for those kind of activities to take place. So that vicious cycle of poverty, criminality continues itself. So there's a very close correlation between this drug problem challenge that we're having and the challenges of terrorism and other insecurity challenges.
And of course, Dr. Chinedu Ejiofor, you deal with the marine world. Your marine club is an association of clubs that deal with
maritime professionals,
right,
and stakeholders. Yes.
So you're directly connected with what's happening at the ports, through Nigeria's territorial waters and all of that. And a lot of that is coming through those sort of ports. I mean, there have been very big discoveries, but it's not necessarily new, though. I mean, West Africa has a history for being a storage and transportation hub for something like cocaine.
Well, I must make it clear that Marine Club of Nigeria is not just about water. It's about maritime economy. We advocate for the maritime economy, so we keep a close watch on all transport modes, plus related industries and sectors, including the airports, including the land borders, including the railway movements. All of that come under the ambit of Marine Club of Nigeria mandate. So, and yes, it's a long problem. It's not a new thing. And I foresee...
But the point is that it's getting worse, according to the UN.
It's getting worse, and it might get even worse.
Right.
Because as of today, or perhaps tomorrow, our president, Mr. President, is expected to sign the African Continental Free Trade area.
Which opens the borders,
Which
basically.
opens the borders,
Right.
mostly opens the borders. But free trade doesn't mean free trade in prohibited substances. It doesn't mean trading in banned things like drugs, hard drugs. So what it means is that we need our security agencies, the whole lot of them, including the customs, including NDLA, including the Navy, including the Marine Police, all of them have got to up their antenna. They've got to actually...
And you're not impressed with what they're doing at the
Well, at the moment, they need to do more, even before the agreement is signed, even
Right.
before we ratify it. But once it's signed and is ratified, the problem we get is expected to get worse, because there will be a likelihood of movement, not just from South
Absolutely.
America, but from other African countries. So what we need to do is to wake up and do the needful. And the needful is to make sure that all the entry points into Nigeria and out of Nigeria are well policed
Right.
by the different security agencies.
Well, that's a tall order, isn't it, Dr. Madubike? Because they're not going to suddenly wake up in the middle of the night and say, right, we're going to police the borders, as Kabiru Adamu was saying there. I mean, there's a history of porous borders. Is that why this new wave of drugs trading is on the increase? I mean, because we're seeing more hauls of drugs like cocaine. I mean, in a perverse sort of way, that could actually show that you're doing a lot more work, because you're finding more of these hauls.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that is why there is an increase in the drug trade. If you will recall, if you will recall the arrest and seizures that has been made by the agency over the years, you will see that the bulk of it was from the airports. But haven't noticed that they've now devised a new way of bringing this drug into the country through the seaports, particularly now, you know, hide it in a container with other goods and things like that. The agency has now set up a dedicated department.
Right, but does the fact that it's
is-
coming in through the seaport suggest that there are bigger quantities of it? You see what I mean? That they're bringing them in. You know, I understand production in South America has actually increased, and that is partly responsible.
It's not cocaine per se. It's even the pharmaceutical opiates that we've made. I mean, substantial, large quantity of seizure through the seaports, and it is that necessitated the setting up of a dedicated department that is known as the ports, to take charge of all the ports, the seaport, the airport, and the land borders now in the agency. That is to say that with time, and we're trying to procure all the necessary equipment that will enable us to man those ports effectively. So
It's always the same story, isn't it, Kabiru? I mean, we're trying to get the equipment. I mean, if I asked you that question 10 years ago, you'd probably have said the same thing, wouldn't you? I mean,
no, it wouldn't be the same thing, because at that time, most of the arrests and seizures that were done were at the seaports, at the airports. And we have equipment that has been donated and bought by the government too, that man the airports. But now the concentration has shifted to the seaports now,
Right.
and that is why that also necessary effort is being put
Right,
up
okay.
to tackle,
right, okay. I'm going to ask you to hold that thought for a minute. We're going to take a break. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about West Africa becoming a transit point for drug smuggling from South America and other parts of the world. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Now, in West Africa, there have been recent large drug hauls in the region which suggest its importance as a transit point in the drugs trade from South America to both Africa and further north into Europe. On Tuesday, customs authorities in Senegal say they seized 800 kilograms of cocaine on a ship arriving at the capital Dakar at the weekend. It was packed into bags hidden inside new cars that had arrived from Brazil. It was reported that they were heading for Ghana and Germany. It's the latest in a series of large seizures off the West African coast this year. Last week, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime said 3.4 tons of cocaine were seized in Africa in 2017, back up to 2013 levels after falling to 1.2 tons in 2015.
From 2017 till now, you know, we have been on top of our game. From November, December 2017, when one of our very important collaborators gave us the hint that there were 9 containers coming to Nigeria that contained tramadol, we were ready for them at the port. Out of the 9, 6 of them contained tramadol pills to the tune of 180 million. Since then, we have had more containers. We have liaised with customers to inform them accurately. The containers that were searched in November, December last year, and the pills that was got 580 million were the ones that we were informed. We were the ones that let the nation know that those containers were under our watch. Right now, we still have some 29 more containers. But I can tell you, our linkage between the source country and Nigeria has been strengthened, and it has. We are the first port of call for that information about whatever tramadol is coming into Nigeria. By the way, if you are familiar with the markets of tramadol in Nigeria, you will discover that it has spiked up by 2,000%, which shows that it's not readily available in the market again.
It's a spokesman from the NDLEA, which is the agency that deals with trafficking, drugs trafficking in Nigeria. With me in the studio, Dr. Ngozi Madubike, the commander of narcotics and principal staff officer drug demand reduction at the NDLEA, the Nigerian Federal Agency, as I mentioned, that's charged with eliminating the trafficking of hard drugs, the respected defense and security analyst Kabiru Adamu, and the president of the Marine Club of Nigeria, Dr. Chinedu Jidofo, who keeps a close eye on Nigeria's territorial waters. Thank you for staying with us. And Kabiru, I mean, we just heard the clip from that spokesman from the NDLA. He was talking about tramadol, but obviously it's not just tramadol. I mean, the big issue that's raising concern with the United Nations and so on is cocaine. And there is a political element in all of this, isn't there? Because there had been hope that that peace agreement in Colombia would have had an impact in the production of cocaine, but it doesn't seem to have helped very much, does it?
Yeah, and this was the point I was making earlier on, that the proceeds from drug trafficking is actually used by those who benefit from it to perpetuate their activities. They take advantage of structural weaknesses within government, sometimes through incentivization of government officials, or sometimes through direct attempt to take over control of governance itself. And I think there are examples of places like Guinea-Bissau, to an extent Equatorial Guinea, where we've seen that. And then, of course, once they create the right environment, like what we have in South America, then it's very easy for them to perpetrate their activities. But more importantly is the fact that the market exists for drugs. And I think no matter where we go, we need to come back to that fact. It's because there is a market. That's why the business, quote unquote, thrives. I think the kind of advocacy we're seeing, there needs to be an improvement in that kind of advocacy.
So the consumer countries need to worry about consumption, because if there is no demand, then there won't be supply.
Well, one aspect. Then even the transit countries, because I think that is what affected us in the Sahel region.
That's where West Africa comes in, transit.
We relaxed because we thought we are transit countries, and all of a sudden there is a transition from transit now to user. And this is increasing by the day. I was giving the example of a lady who told us, she had an encounter with a woman, or women rather, who were victims of banditry, and how they have to give their children, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, tramadol and other drugs, just to allow them to sleep, to numb them from the pain around them. So subconsciously, they are sort of bringing in their kids into addiction, and before you know it, these kids will grow up.
And that's a very good point. I'd like to get into that more a bit later in the program. But Chinedu Jidon, for the production levels getting higher in Central and Latin America, possibly because of improved facilities down there, production facilities, a lack of political will to tackle the production. But why West Africa? I mean, we've heard people talk about the fact that it's a transit point, it's easy to sort of move things through. But I mean, why did they decide to come here, do you think?
Well, you said it before. You said that our borders are porous. And that's a fact. Our borders are porous. And, but I do know that our government, at least from what we are seeing lately, is desirous of checkmating these.
Well, the government always says that.
No,
but basically,
not
those who engage in this trade, let's be clear, are always looking for points of least resistance. And West Africa has a history of leaky security.
Why I said so is that earlier this week, I think it was on Monday, or was it Tuesday, Mr. President signed a bill into law, and that bill is the anti-piracy security law. This week.
Was that a bill that you were sort of interested in?
They were interested in that.
Right.
It has been signed into law now. So, and I said earlier that the Free Trade Area Treaty, he's expected to sign that today or tomorrow, if he has not done that already by now. So these are all indications that there is a kind of a wake-up call. It's almost like the government now wants to up the activity in that field. But at the end of the day, the presidency can give us all the environment to do something. But then the agencies have got to.
They're the ones charged.
They are the ones charged. Yeah, because if he gives you a law, he's not going to be there to implement the law. It's for you to implement. So all the security agencies, the safety security agencies, and the MASA is there, NDLA, the customs, the whole marine, they're all there. The Navy, they've got to. But I believe the law also has empowered the agencies in terms of equipment, in terms of manpower training, in terms of deployment. So we expect activity.
Well, I mean, the law is quite different from having
I appreciate that.
Having the capacity to deliver the job.
But I do know
the
entire country is now aware of the dangers we face from drug.
Right. Well, let me bring Dr. Ngozi Madubike there, who is from the NDLEA. I mean, it's curious and interesting, isn't it, that you don't have the usual drug-related violence in West Africa that's associated with the trade. In other words, if you look at a lot of the people who are coming to America, the US at the moment, from Latin America, are running away from drugs-related violence, where gangs are taking over streets and shooting, and it's absolute mayhem down there. We're not seeing that sort of attack, that sort of gang violence, beyond obviously what we know of, insurgencies, Boko Haram and kidnapping. But you don't sort of see gangs taking over territories and fighting each other for drugs, murders, that sort of thing that you see in Latin America. Why is that?
I agree with that. We don't have that kind of gang here in Nigeria, but then we also have huge problems on our hands by the type of crime that we have in our own society. The kidnapping, the terrorism, the armed robbery, and so on.
Yeah, but what I mean is drugs-related crime.
Of course, they are all drug-related. They are the underlying factor to to crime. For a lot of times, the army had said they discovered drugs in the camps of the terrorists. And then for kidnappers, when you go to their den, at the end of the day, they use drugs to enhance whatever they want to do.
But obviously the personal use is not the same as sort of trafficking.
Okay, have we also asked ourselves, how do they get funding? How do the terrorists fund their activities? We have never really, carried out thorough research to find out how they get their funding, because it is likely to be as a result of drug trafficking, drug trade. Because if large quantity of drug can be found in their camp, that means they can also deal in those drugs.
So obviously, yes, that's a good point.
We do not have
they
such,
have access to
yes,
it.
they have access to drugs. They can, and they move from one town to the other, from Nigeria to neighboring countries. So it's easier for them to dispose of drugs or get drugs to sell and get money to carry out their activities. We may not have the kind of gang that is found in North America, but that is not to say we don't even pray to have such gangs here in Nigeria, because we may not be able to handle them or to deal with it.
Right, and we've just got literally about a minute or so, Kabiru. I suppose at the risk of repeating oneself, I mean, the West Africa appears to have a very smooth and very facilitated path of the drugs through the subcontinent, and it simply does not come up against any strong attempts to break the trade up, because the fight against the drugs trade in West Africa is simply not strong enough. Is that a fair assessment?
I agree. I think it's a very fair assessment. Governments are operating in silos. Institutions of government are operating in silos. There is no synergy in intelligence sharing. So it's very easy, really, for the environment to be permissive for drug trafficking. President Buhari has called on our international partners, and he made this call last week, for assistance and equipment to help our institutions, security agencies, in fighting drug trafficking. That for me will not be enough. We need training on that, and the overall element there is their cooperation. Let them work together as a team with the single purpose of stopping the trafficking in drug. The Interpol has done amazing work in terms of curbing
international police.
Exactly. Right. So we need to key into that. I know we've got a lot of association with that body, but we need to factor, especially our goal. What is our goal? To stop or limit the drug trafficking routes that are within our country. The last point I want to emphasize is the social sort of coexistence between border communities. We tend to forget that. Sometimes these border communities facilitate trade between them, and it's very easy for these gangs, these groups, drug traffickers, to take advantage of those kind of social coexistence.
Good point. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about West Africa as a transit point for drug smuggling. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, there are at least 2 distinct transshipment drugs hubs in West Africa. One centered on Guinea-Bissau and Guinea, and one centered in the Bight of Benin, which spans from Ghana to Nigeria. Colombian traffickers apparently transport things like cocaine by so-called mother ship to the West African coast before offloading to smaller vessels. Some of this cocaine would then proceed onwards by sea to Spain and Portugal, but some is left as payment to West Africans for their assistance. The West Africans then traffic this cocaine on their own behalf, largely by commercial air couriers. The UN says shipments are also being sent in modified small aircraft from Venezuela to various West African destinations. Well, with me in the studio, Dr. Gozie Madubike, the Commander of Narcotics and Principal Staff Officer Drug Demand Reduction at the NDLEA, the Nigerian federal agency charged with eliminating the trafficking of hard drugs, the Defense and Security Analyst Kabiru Adamu, and the President of the Marine Club of Nigeria, Dr. Chinedu Jidofo. Thank you very much indeed to all of you for staying with us. And I was going to ask you, Dr. Madubike, what is it that you need as the agency charged with fighting drugs trafficking and drug smuggling in Nigeria? What do you need to fight that and to come out to be able to say we're doing an effective job in tackling this?
Thank you. It may interest you to know that the agency is charged with the responsibility of coordinating all drug laws, and then in doing that to work in collaboration with other relevant stakeholders, and charged with the responsibility to reduce the demand, that is the consumption of drugs within Nigeria, and at the same time reduce the supply of drugs within Nigeria. That's trafficking, dealing, possession, manufacturing, and so on. And since inception of the agency, I must say that the agency has not been well funded. Funding is a huge problem. Apart from that too, the agency, as you see it today, is going to be 30 years old.
That's
in
the
a very
NDLEA.
the NDLEA,
Right.
yes. And it has barely less than 5,000 staff to man 774 local government areas.
But don't you cooperate
in
with the
Nigeria.
police? I mean, don't you work in tandem with the police and all of that? I would imagine that you are linked. I mean, you're all law enforcement. That's what he was talking about, synergy.
Of
I mean,
course,
there's got to be some
that
sort of
is
synergy.
even why we are able to do what we are doing.
Right.
What we've been able to achieve so far, because we collaborate a lot with other sister agencies and other MDAs. But that is not enough, because these officers who are NDLEA officers are trained specially on detection, investigation, prosecution of drug-related crimes. So it's a different thing liaising or collaborating with a sister agency in information sharing that we do, and sometimes in even on operations.
Right, but what about things like, I don't mean to sort of have you, because we've got other people on the panel here, but this is relevant because you're from the agency charged with fighting drugs trafficking. What sort of interventions are you seeing from ECOWAS, for instance? Because this is a region, it's a sub-regional problem, it's not just Nigeria. You've got it across the whole of the region, according to what we're hearing. I understand there have been interventions against things like money laundering and also attempts to study the structure of the drugs trade and how West African governments can intervene. I mean, they're very good at holding conferences. Has all that achieved much?
Yes, it has, especially from United Nations Office for Drug Control, the ECOWAS, and other international partners. They've been very, very helpful in the area of capacity building of officers, capacity building in all areas of our operations. Yes, and also in information sharing with the ECOWAS and other international partners. Yes, that has been very, very helpful.
Right. Well, Dr. Chinedu Jidofor, you keep your eye on the sort of territorial waters and the territorial turf. I mean, one observer said that on a scale of 1 to 10, ECOWAS had only achieved about 1.5. That's a pretty damning statistic, isn't it?
It is, but it's close to the truth. It's close to the truth. You see, we have agencies. We have the will of the government in giving laws to the likes of NDLEA, the police, and the rest of them. What I think is lacking is initiative. I think most of these agencies wait until there's crisis or until there's manifestly massive problems on our hands, and they are waiting to be directed. Now, if you have a law, no matter how small the resources you have, let us see activity on whatever you have. Let us see something going on daily basis, not just waiting to be directed.
Well, we
to
do
act.
see things on television.
No,
I mean, we've seen them come up, and they make a big deal of it
Not
whenever
on television. I mean, in reality.
Right.
The worry of maritime people like ourselves is that if they don't focus a lot on intelligence gathering,
Right.
on nipping the problem in the bud, on stopping movement of drugs into West Africa, into Nigeria, then ships that are doing the normal legitimate business will become molested. They'll probably become overzealous, and before you know it, every ship is boarded and they are being harassed. Seafarers are being harassed.
And of course, ultimately, in the Nigerian context, the
Yes.
potential for corruption goes up.
It goes up. So we don't want that. So I think the agencies ought to focus more on intelligence gathering to stop the movement coming in the first place.
Right, that's a good point. Let me bring in Kabiru Adamu there, because yesterday we had the outgoing Director General of the Nigerian Space Agency. And Nigeria has launched 6 satellites into space. One of the reasons, ostensible reasons for that launch, was to try and gather intelligence. I mean, intelligence in terms of the borders, intelligence in terms of, you know, terrorism and all that sort of thing, drugs trafficking. But he was complaining that they provide these details. They've got the satellites up in space and nobody looks at them.
I'm frankly a bit doubtful about that claim.
Right.
I mean, it's not my place to put him on the spot, but I'm very doubtful about that claim. And my reason is we've severally in different fora asked that question. How come we have satellites, but yet we have the kind of problems that we're having? Surveillance in any form would be very, very useful in our current circumstance. We have, I mean, what region of the country would you pick that does not have a challenge? So if the space agency has the kind of capabilities that he claimed they have and they're supplying those kind of information, then I'm very surprised that...
well, surely those satellites are up there doing something.
No, I doubt. There were times when we're told that they were not functional. And frankly, if they were functional by now, we would have seen feeds somewhere.
Right.
And then we also know that there are commercial aspects of those satellites that could have benefited Nigeria, and we're not seeing that. So, like I said, I really don't want to, you know.
No, I understand that, but I think the key thing is the point you made earlier, the issue of synergy. I mean, the left arm doesn't know what the right arm is doing, and that's really the problem often in Nigeria. Different departments do different things, but they're not coordinating whatever it is they're doing. Let me bring you in, Dr. Madubike there. There was talk at one stage that low-level drug offenses should be decriminalized in West Africa in general and Nigeria in particular in order to free up resources to focus on drugs cartels that are undermining the region by using it to transit things like cocaine. I mean, you talked about the fact that you don't have enough funding and so on and so forth. In fact, the commission that made that recommendation that drugs should be decriminalized was headed by former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo, who said that punishing the personal use of drugs does not work and that current policies incite corruption and provoke violence. What's happened to that report by the West African Commission on Drugs? That's what it's called. It came out like 2 or 3 years ago. Clearly you never had contact with that.
With that report, yes. But that is not to say that we are not in tune with the global ways of doing things.
But what are you saying to the government is the best way? I mean, do you support the idea of decriminalizing things like marijuana, for example? I mean, we saw in the news the other day that the NDLA there's a big deal about a 90-year-old man who had been arrested or something for having marijuana. I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, why would you waste resources on things like that when you've got big drugs problems from methamphetamines to, you know, to cocaine and so on?
Nigeria as a country has a law, and the law is not repealed, yes.
No, I understand that, but what I'm saying is that do you advise the government on the fact that this would probably make your work easier and that essentially they're dissipating your energies by having you run around people who are smoking marijuana, for instance?
No, what the NDLA has adopted is that we have put less emphasis on low-level drug traffickers.
Right.
And then for some people who are using it are not prosecuted or arrested. Rather, they are referred for treatment. So I think that is just what the NDLEA has succeeded in doing. Then we also have a threshold that by the time we make an arrest, we will be able to say whether this individual is a user who should be referred for treatment, or he is an unrepentant dealer, even with the quantity, because sometimes you may have arrested somebody once with a smaller quantity and you consider him a user, and probably after some time there is an intelligence that he is dealing, and you make that arrest again, maybe with a bigger quantity this time, which has exceeded the threshold.
But is there a difference between what you're doing and what because the police will arrest someone for drugs as well? I mean, what's the difference between the two of you?
If police arrest somebody for drug, it's expected that they should refer or transfer the person to NDLEA for the law to take its
So
course.
everything to do with drugs you deal with?
Yes.
Right, and technically that's the way it ought to...
That is what it's supposed to be, ideally.
Right, okay.
Yes.
Well, let's hold that thought. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about West Africa becoming a transit point for drug smuggling from South America and other parts of the world. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Now, the United Nations says its Drugs and Crime Division is registering new alarming trends on drug trafficking in West Africa with disruptive and destabilizing effects on governance, security, economic growth and public health. The UN notes the increasing transition of opiates through West Africa on routes to European and North American markets. It says that West and Central Africa, along with North Africa, accounts for 87% of all pharmaceutical opiates derived from opium poppies are seized globally. Methamphetamine seizures have almost reached the same levels as cocaine seizures. As for heroin trafficking, it is also on the rise, with seizures across the region, especially in the airports of Lagos in Nigeria, Accra in Ghana, and Cotonou in Benin, closely followed by Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, Lomé in Togo, and Bamako in Mali. Well, with me in the studio, Dr. Ngozi Madubike, the Commander of Narcotics and Principal Staff Officer, Drug Demand Reduction at the NDLA, the Nigerian federal agency charged with eliminating the trafficking of hard drugs, the Defense and Security Analyst Kabiru Adamu, and the President of the Marine Club of Nigeria, Dr. Chinedu Jidofo. Thank you for staying with us. And you were making a point when we were on break there about the fact that the laws in Nigeria must be strictly followed, even if they're not practical to follow them. I mean, in terms of the use of drugs and so on in Nigeria.
Well, I believe that the law should be enforced the way it is.
Well, we all do.
Good.
It's a practicality,
if the practicality, if we lack the manpower or the resources or the capacity, we grow them. That is what we should do to protect our people.
They don't have the capacity to grow. I mean, this stuff has been going on for years, decades, and it's getting worse.
This is a new era. This is a new era. I do know in the villages, I come from a place, and I know that young people have been messed up terribly by usage of cannabis or marijuana or what they call weed. A whole lot of people have been made useless by these things. It's not as if it doesn't have effect. It does have effect. And young people, instead of going to look for work, instead of going to school, instead of going to make themselves useful, are smoking marijuana or whatever, and they get messed up in life. So I'm in total agreement with strict enforcement of the law against any form of drug as provided for in our law, the NDLA law. And if we don't have capacity, we just need to grow the capacity. I don't know why we should be shying away from our problem. And we should not just wait for whatever the West is interested in, and then we jump at it, and then that becomes the issue. If they are talking about cocaine and whatever else they are talking about, it is also our problem. But it shouldn't be the only problem we have. Our problem should cover all the things that are banned, all the drugs that are banned in Nigeria. And then we just have to wake up and do the needful.
Right. Okay, Kabiru Adamu, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, because there's been a trend around the world for decriminalization of softer drugs for the simple reason that from a security point of view, it's been impossible for them to be able to handle it.
Yeah, I will approach this by riding on his last comment. I think our laws are due for a review. I'm aware, based on interaction with the police, for instance, they're supporting the role of the NDLEA. And I mean, to give you an example, I'm not sure, but I think drugs like tramadol and some of the other things that are being abused are not even recognized by our law. So they are extending the law, if I use that language, to include those kind of drugs, which is why it's a bit difficult for them to get prosecution.
That's a good point.
In court.
Right.
So I think the legislative arm of government, the National Parliament, the 9th Assembly, needs to look closely at our laws and see how they can review the law to include new substances that are being abused at the moment.
But even if they did that, it's not going to make much of a difference, is it? I mean, the law is simply words until you enforce the law.
Now, the difference it will make,
Right.
it will capacitate the agencies to work. Right now, they are more or less using their initiative
Right.
to arrest.
But you can see that they've made it a big issue. And I can see Dr. Madhuvike shaking her head then. I mean, what is this? What is the state of this law, and what is your reaction to what's being said?
I agree that the law needs to be reviewed, but not with regards to the drugs. It's with regards to how we see a drug user. In the law, it criminalizes a drug user. Whether you're using or you're selling or you're dealing, it's the same penalty. That is the aspect that I think our law should be reviewed.
Right.
But
so
the
how do
law
you think
took
that
care
law
of
should be reviewed?
the-
What would you like to see happen? You want to separate the drug user from the drug dealer.
Yeah.
Right.
I think I want to.
And
I want to
you
separate it
advocate more leniency for the
for
drug
drug
user.
user.
Right.
Yes.
And of course, you are, I mean, you deal with drug demand reduction. You're a psychologist.
Yes, I am.
And so to that extent, you have a first-hand knowledge of what we're talking about, because the UN data actually underestimates the extent of drugs trafficking and drugs use in the continent itself, rather than those that are just passing through. And what you're saying is that there's a lot of it, and that dissipates the energy of the agency. And what you'd like to see happen is for there to be a review of that law.
Like I said, with regards to drug using, but the law itself took care of the emerging substances by, categorizing them as narcotic and psychotropic substances.
Right. So it's already there.
It's already
basically.
there.
Right.
And then the NAFDAC law, which regulates the use of licit substances,
Yes.
has also taken care of the law.
So these are
with
drugs
regards
that,
to-
for example, tramadol is something that is a prescription
It's
drug.
a prescription
Right.
drug. It's a prescription drug that is meant to relieve pain,
Right.
severe and mild pain, but being diverted, used for recreational purposes. So it's supposed to be dispensed by a health personnel, not to be sold over the counter. So it is the regulation and the monitoring and supervision that need to be enforced,
Right.
not the law. Then the issue of UN saying that cannabis is not associated with mental illness and as such should be decriminalized and so on. Yes, they do not have that problem in their countries, so they can come up with such a law. The biggest problem we have in Nigeria here is cannabis. By the National Drug Use Survey, which has just been released, 14.3 million Nigerians are on drugs other than alcohol and tobacco, and 10.3 are on cannabis. So you can see
that's a huge
that's a
number.
huge number.
Right.
A very huge number. So there's no way we'll close our eyes to issues of cannabis and then concentrate on drugs that is a problem to other nations of the world. So I think our problem is what we should be concerned with. What is our problem? If we look at the drug use survey, cannabis is the biggest problem, followed by prescription opiates, pharmaceutical opiates. And those are the areas that I think Nigeria should dissipate energy on.
Okay. A final word from you.
Well, madam, in respect of what you've just said, I think states like Ondo State and a few other states that are gearing up to start production of cannabis, they ought to be told that it is against our law to produce or distribute or consume cannabis in this country. So we shouldn't be implementing laws emanating from some other countries when our own laws are neglected. people who are producing cannabis, who are using cannabis, who are selling cannabis, they are committing crime, and they should be stopped.
Right. Well, let's get a final word from you, Kabir Adamu.
My emphasis.
You wouldn't want him to be your headmaster, would you?
Yeah, the correlation between drug, trafficking and drug usage and crime, and in the security challenge that we have in the country, that is more or less my focus. And I think currently we're not doing very well in that regard, both in stopping access to these drugs by the criminals and offenders, as well as the fact that they are using possibly, and Madam mentioned some in the course of our conversation, that research has not been done. I'm aware that research has been done to show clearly how drug routes have been controlled by terrorist groups, where they provide access and collect dues from traffickers, or in some instances actually traffic them and use the proceeds to buy arms and other functions. So it's a fact. So those are the areas that I think we need to focus on. And I do not think it's the responsibility of one agency. Neither should it be the responsibility of one country. The word is synergy, synergy, and synergy.
Okay, Kabiru Adamu, the Defense and Security Analyst, and Dr. Ngozi Madubuko from the NDLEA, and Dr. Chinedu Jidofa from the Marine Club of Nigeria. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again for a fresh edition tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.